you were to say to somebody, why should they study Plato? Let's say a young person, why should they study Plato? What would you say?
I always say you should study and read what you enjoy. That's what's most important. And you will enjoy Plato. But if you want to be serious, we want to use that word, you want to get it more central to your life, and the benefits for your life is it sets you free. It sets you free of the framework and burden of ideas which you have inherited and picked up heaven knows where over the years. And it gives you a framework in which to do this. And it will actually help you to do this. And that's a great freedom, to be free of the burden of ideas which you have inherited from the past, which will just govern your life and control your life and affect all your relationships and really everything you engage in. It is hugely enjoyable. I was suggested I should read it when I was in my early 20s. I took it on, I started to read it. It was ancient philosophy, I knew that. I was a scientist. For a scientist, ancient is sort of quaint. You know, why would you read that? And it's people believing all sorts of strange, outdated ideas, and you wondered how they could be so naive as to believe them. And all of that ancient stuff has been debunked since. But it wasn't like that with Plato. It was extraordinary. It was a dialogue that threw me completely. It was a dialogue, and a very open dialogue. There was this character called Socrates who just listened and questioned. People whom you knew Socrates wouldn't agree with, and Plato wouldn't agree with, were speaking, putting forward outlandish ideas on justice, that if you're a just person, you lose out. Don't be just, it's naive. This person was speaking and speaking and speaking in the Republic, which was the book I was reading. And he's allowed to speak and say all this unreasonable stuff. And then Socrates starts to question. And you're shown how, through question and answer, you can highlight ignorance and you can begin to evolve towards wisdom and truth. I just thought it was extraordinary. Yes, I was completely gripped by this, totally opposite to what I was expecting. And stayed with it since.
Now, there's Socrates and there's Plato. Can you just explain the relationship between them and how that fits?
I'm not sure about explaining it. It's a very fortunate chance of history. There was a person called Socrates. There was a person called Plato. Other people have written about Socrates, and you can research the history. He was put to death by the Athenians in 399 BC. And the background to that was he was a thorn in their side. Simple as that. He was just a thorn in their side. He engaged in philosophy. You mightn't recognize it as philosophy, but he engaged in philosophy by going around and just talking to people down in the marketplace, down in the agora. Mainly by questioning. No respecter of persons. He would challenge anyone, he'd question anyone. And what he was questioning and challenging was, you'd have to say, ignorant notions embodied in philosophy or in political thinking. He was very influential in the sense that everyone knew about him in Athens. He featured in plays, and they had to get him out of the way. They did that in 399 BC, a background of all sorts of misunderstandings, begrudgery, political machinations. But Plato had been with Socrates for 10 years. So you have two people now. Socrates, the older man, the master, Plato, really the disciple, the faithful follower. He's 28 when Socrates is put to death at age 70. And he'd been perhaps 10 years with the older man. And it makes a huge impression. And having Socrates taken away like that was devastating for him. And all he wanted to do thereafter was follow philosophy as presented by Socrates. And so he wrote dialogues. He had a decision to make. Socrates said he knew nothing. Plato understood what that meant. But it's good to teach something. How do you teach something when you know nothing? But he set about it. Socrates wouldn't write. Plato decided, if you don't write, who's going to know about any of this in 100 years' time? So he decides to write, he decides to teach. He sets up his academy, he writes dialogues. And because of the academy, because of the dialogues, a figure, Socrates, who would have been forgotten, is now remembered and respected because Plato was able to present Socrates fairly, present Socrates so you really understood him. And the academy itself, the dialogues, and then the person of Socrates have been influential really since Aristotle came to the academy. Aristotle was a student of Plato. People normally talk about Aristotle versus Plato. It's not the way the ancient world saw it. You don't have to read it like that. He had different views, but what Socratic philosophy is about, hold different views, challenge, debate. So they're the two people, they're the two characters.
And all this took place a long time ago. How is this relevant? How would you say this is relevant for people today?
Well, it's relevant because questions are always relevant. And once you have a framework of questioning, which isn't destructive, which is constructive, which is genuinely exploratory, and focuses on really important questions, such as what is justice? The question in the Republic, that work I read first, my first work was the Republic, the question there is what is justice? There's no age and no era in which the question what is justice is irrelevant. And then Plato gives you a very beautiful framework within which to explore the question, and some very good guidelines. But he doesn't mean you to take those guidelines as a dogmatic teaching. He means you to keep up the active exploration. Exploration, openness, inquiry is important in every era, every age. Any age which doesn't engage in it is simply bound by the ideas which it's inherited and is fixed by them, and it runs into all sorts of difficulties because of ideas which it never questions and never challenges. It also works within the life of an individual. Just learn to question, learn to challenge, learn to be philosophic in the Socratic sense. I had a group this term introducing Socrates, and they were new to all of this. When I asked them at the end what they found practical, they said, well, the idea of Socrates that you don't know. Socrates' idea what you don't know. I've had people very challenged by that, but these people were not. They said, no, this worked for us because you stopped thinking that you know, and now you can learn from others, and you stop proceeding on ideas which are flawed, and you're open. You can learn from other people. They said it changed their relationships with other people, and it changed their lives. So it's hugely relevant. And I can talk about the cave story, which is questions the very nature of the reality of the world we live in. That's very dramatic. Depends on how dramatic you want this. It depends on what the age or the era is on for. Very few ages, very few eras are on for the suggestion that we actually live in a shadow world. It's just a dream, more or less of our own contriving, and you don't have to stay in it. You don't have to live in it. That's very dramatic. It depends on the courage and bravery of the age, or the courage and bravery of the forward aspirant.
Yes, I think courage, wisdom, self-control, justice, it's relevant forever, isn't it?
Every age needs to rediscover those anew for themselves in reality.
Can you say a little bit more about Socrates? Just develop his character a little bit more?
Well, this idea
Show him to us.
This idea of status anxiety, which Horan has written about, helps me in understanding him. He didn't suffer in any way from status anxiety. He had no concerns whatsoever as to what anyone thought about him, and that makes you very special. De Botton says, if you are totally free from status anxiety, you are a rare character in history. Very, very rare. Because of that, he was able to pursue truth and wisdom through dialogue and through interaction with others, with no concern and no fear at all. And because of that, he was such a powerful example for Plato of how to live the philosophic life and how to be fearless in pursuit of wisdom and truth, that he just had to immortalize that. There was a maxim at the time, which they all would have known, know thyself. The question was, what does it mean? How did he have his confidence? How could he be so free of status anxiety? Because he knew something beyond status, beyond the changing world of what people think about you, beyond the changing world of this fashion and ideas and that fashion and ideas. Plato captures it in a question, in form of a question in a dialogue called the Timaeus. What is that which always is and has no becoming? What is that which is becoming and never is? I think Socrates was in touch with that which is unchanging. And once you're firmly in touch with that, the rest of this is just a play. It's a play of shadows. And you serve humanity within that, out of love of humanity. That's the person he was. It's a phrase he uses about himself. Someone who pursues dialogue and discourse out of philanthropia, out of love of humanity. That's the sort of person he was. A real force of nature. Couldn't be bothered to write anything down. Couldn't even be bothered to remember what he'd said yesterday, except he does to occasionally say, as I've been saying for years and years and years. But there it is, an extraordinary person whom I think had the real self-knowledge, which is at the level of the unchanging, not at the level of the changing.
And you've explained a little bit about how you started reading Plato. How has that developed since then? I know it's been a big part of your life.
It's taken over my life. It sort of represents the thinking framework within which I operate, no matter what material I'm presented with. And then in practical terms, I talked about my first encounter. From then I got the reputation, I'd read the Republic. I was dealing with people who hadn't even read the Republic. In the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, so they asked me to do things, so I got to give lectures. I got to run an event called Day with Plato. As time went on, I ran residential weeks where people would come and we'd gather and we'd read dialogues. I did those all over the world. And then as my reputation grew, that was a joke by the way, as my reputation grew, someone asked me around 2008 to undertake the production of a new translation of the dialogues of Plato from Greek into English. And that was against the background of having very little Greek. But anyway, I learned Greek by reading Plato, and I took on the project. And that's really, that's just made such a difference to my life. So I've been completed that, really largely completed now. The translations are available on the internet. I have some dialogues to finish off, and a book will come out hopefully by the end of next year. That's in progress at the moment. So that was it for me. I also feel I have a responsibility then to pass on, in one way or another, people who want to know what I have. Just something which I regard as important, which people need to hear, and I know they'll be better for hearing. And it really is, be terrified of dogma, be terrified of fixed thinking and ideas, and begin to see for yourself the harm they can do. When you read history, you see it through that lens and you see the harm they have done. And it's just innocent people who really thought they knew best, who really thought they were acting for the best, doing a lot of harm, a lot of damage. So I think ultimately going back to that Socratic not knowing is important. That Socrates class, I had this term. When I asked them at the end what stood out for them, many people said the idea I don't know. And that's a great relief to go around and meet people thinking I know. You can really meet people. You can really learn from people.
So if we leave the last word to Socrates, what would be one phrase you would like to close with from him? What's his one tip-top phrase?
I got fixated on value, wisdom and truth more than money, reputation and honour. And reputation extends, even what do you think of me? Honour, what position do you hold? It doesn't matter. compared to wisdom and truth, these things don't count. Value wisdom and truth more than you value money, reputation, and honor.
Dr. David Horan, thank you very much.
Thank you.